Welcome to the Simply Pediatrics Podcast, simplifying holistic healthcare for infants and children. We're so glad you're here. Join Jennifer Zethner, holistic pediatric nurse practitioner and holistic mom of 3 on a mission. Listen in as she shares the answers to the most asked questions from parents in her practice every day and offers parents practical strategies and actionable steps to support their child's health and well-being. Enjoy this insightful episode of the Simply Pediatrics Podcast and stay tuned for more information at the end of the podcast.
Hi, I'm Jennie Zethner. That's right, I'm here in my car. I don't know about the rest of you, but I find sitting in my car to be very peaceful. It happens to be one of the quietest places I have in my life. I have 3 children. I work full time. I'm busy like the rest of you, and I really would like to share information, and doing it from my car is most convenient. So I'm going to ask you to please forgive if there's any commotion behind me, any beeping, any dogs barking, ambulances, fire trucks, etc. I'll do the best I can to find quiet places. I assure you I will never be driving my vehicle when I speak to you. I will always be pulled over and parked. I am typically parked waiting for one of my children to come out of an event or something. So that is what I'm doing with my time here. And I look forward to sharing information with you. And again, forgive me for being a little unprofessional being here in my car, but I hope it works. And with that, let's get started.
Today's episode, constipation in babies under 1 year old.
Hello and welcome. I'm so happy to be here with you today. Today I'm going to talk again, this is part 2 of constipation. Specifically today I'm talking about constipation in our children who are under the age of 1. And there's a lot of information in here, so I'm going to do my best to touch on all the different parts, because 0 to 1 is like this very, very dense, concentrated time of growth. You know, we double our weight by 6 months, we triple by a year, we come out, we're eating formula, or we're breastfeeding. By the time that 1 year is up, we're eating foods. So when it comes to constipation, there's a lot of variables in there, all right? So I'm going to try to break it down as best as I can, all right? So when we have an infant, all right, so let's say infant is under the age of 6 months, so they haven't started eating foods yet. So that decreases a lot of variables, right? So if they're not eating foods, the only variables in there are going to be, are they formula fed or breastfed? So let's start with our formula fed babies. So if you are formula feeding your baby and they are having constipation, and constipation, the definition of constipation for a baby varies, because in our formula fed kids, we really like to see them go, I personally like to see them go a few times a day. Formula fed kids can go a few days without having a bowel movement, but they'll become uncomfortable fairly quickly. If the baby's born C-section, or if there's antibiotic exposure, that exponentially increases your chances of having a child with constipation. And there's a lot of different reasons in there that I'm not going to go into for this podcast. However, if you have those variables there, the C-section and exposure to antibiotics along with formula, you have a real high risk of having a child with digestive issues, whether that be colic or constipation. So, a constipated child doesn't have regular bowel movements, skips multiple days at that, or all the way up to they're straining and they're pushing and they're crying and they're screaming. So that's a full range of like a mild constipation to more concerning constipation. And so for a formula-fed kid, the stepwise approach for that, really, what I do in my practice is I will first make sure you're on an organic formula. So I'm going to switch to make sure you're on an organic formula. All right. And then I would introduce a probiotic. So a probiotic has strains of ideal bacteria that help to digest, particularly the formula. So it helps them to digest. So that's the stepwise approach, is to get a probiotic on board first. And then see a chiropractor, particularly cranial sacral therapy. Believe it or not, a quick adjustment sometimes fixes the constipation quickly. So probiotic, chiropractic work. If you're still seeing trouble, and I recommend trying that probiotic for a week or 2, right, depending on how uncomfortable your child is, but give it a few days. If you still don't see any change to the digestive process for your child under the age of 6 months here, it's time to change the formula. And that is a whole science. It really is. I mean, I'll probably do a whole podcast on formulas at some point, but really you need a good healthcare provider who you trust, who can guide you, because there's a real wide range of where to go with your formulas to assist your child who's having constipation. So you can do a stepwise approach of going to, like, say, a goat milk based formula, which is an A2 casein. If you don't know what that means, then watch my video about dairy. But the A2 caseins are easier to digest. So you can switch over to a goat milk protein. If your baby's still having issues with that, then you do the stepwise of the sensitive formulas, which range widely. They go from a casein-free type of infant formula all the way down to formulas that are even more restricted of common allergens. So those are Nutramigen, Progestamil, Alimentum. There are a lot, so I'm not going to go into the whole range of that. That would be the work you would do with your medical provider for sure. By the way, I am available for virtual appointments when it comes to these types of problems, because I do feel like you don't need an office visit. It is something that can be talked through because there's so much information there. All right. So that's the stepwise approach for our formula-fed infants who are having constipation under the age of 6 months. For our breastfed babies who are having constipation issues under the age of 6 months, that is a little kind of devil in the details. So technically speaking, newborns, babies who are being breastfed can really go a good 5 to 6 days without having a bowel movement, as long as they are comfortable, they're nursing, there's no other symptoms, they're content. I don't really like to see it ongoing. To me, it's a sign that perhaps either we have, some issues, which I'm going to discuss in a minute. If it happens once or twice, that's okay. But just so you know, it's not an emergency. If your child hasn't gone in multiple days, unless they're in the first 2 weeks of life, and in which case you want to really contact your medical provider. But if digestive process has already been established, you've already seen regular bowel movements from your breastfed baby, and then all of a sudden 1 week they don't go for multiple days, you're going to hear from your pediatric provider that they're not all that concerned if your baby's otherwise comfortable. All right. However, if we have an infant who is straining, a breastfed baby who is straining, who's having difficulty going, they're colicky, they're screaming and crying and really uncomfortable with it, and repeatedly missing multiple days, then the first step in that process is really to look at mom's diet. If they were born C-section or exposed to antibiotics, you go straight to a probiotic, right? So if you're breastfeeding but they were born C-section or have been exposed to antibiotics, you do want to talk about with your medical provider putting your baby on a probiotic, because that will help with digestion. So that's the first step. And chiropractor, again, would be the second step. And then we look at mom's diet. The most common foods in mom's diets that causes infants to have slowed digestion is going to be dairy, of course. So dairy products, floury products, cold, and raw foods, really. So kind of looking over mom's diet and encouraging warm and cooked soups, stews, iron-rich meals really helps with mom's healing, and also brings in hearty breast milk, which helps a baby to have a bowel movement. So altering mom's diet. We don't have to say, be dairy-free forever, moms and dads. I know this isn't like a wonderful thing to have to change. I have 3 kids, as you know, and, someone telling me what I can and cannot eat is not something I wanted to hear when I had a baby. But if it's going to make your infant more comfortable, that is the way to go. So we would take some foods out of mom's diets. The other thing to consider for mom is she getting enough to eat? So real easy to forget to feed yourself, mom. So make sure you're getting enough to eat when you're breastfeeding, because that can also cause a baby to have less bowel movements. The other factor for our breastfed babies, and not as much for formula-fed kids, but more for our breastfeeding babies, is if they're not gaining weight. If you have a breastfeeding baby who's not having regular bowel movements and is considered constipated, and is also not gaining weight, then they're probably not getting enough to eat. And that's another reason why you'll see decreased bowel movements, is they're just not getting enough volume to make those bowel movements. So be mindful of all of those factors there, okay? So if you've done all of the suggestions I have included in here, and you still would like to kind of tweak your baby's digestive system and help them along, maybe they're doing a little bit better, but you want to improve it even more, a few other things you can do when they're under that 6-month mark here is tummy time. Tummy time is really important, and it does aid in digestion. Warm baths with a gentle lavender kind of massage also helps them. Bicycling their legs, that is actually helpful for infants. I really don't recommend the rectal stimulation. If you have to do it once or twice, but not something that you should be doing ongoing. Okay. But those two are also, that will also assist your baby with having kind of some optimal digestion if you've already done all the other steps. All right, so now let's talk about our infants 6 months and up who are having some constipation. And that's common. Maybe they were, moving along from 0 to 6 months and having lots of those yellow, seedy, mustardy, breast milk bowel movements, or the more creamy looking formula fed bowel movements 1 to even 6 times a day, right? It's a wide range for our infants. But they're regular, right? You consider them regular. And then at 6 months, you start feeding them. And all of a sudden, I'll get from moms and dads, well, now they just don't go. They go every other day, but they're happy. That's one thing we hear. Or they're not going at all. They're skipping 5 days. They're crying. They're screaming. When they go, they're straining. When they have a bowel movement, it's hard. That is not okay, right? That is an infant that's telling you, whatever you're feeding me, mommy and daddy, it's not okay with my body. So be aware of that when you start to feed your infant. Now, if you go back to my podcast about first foods, I have some recommendations that I give, and a lot of that has to do with helping to maintain the digestion. If you do the standard American diet of processed cereals, like the rice cereals, and fruits, you're definitely going to see some digestive upset. The gluey cereals definitely add to the constipation. So I do not recommend any cereals. I do not recommend any fruits, and there's a variety of reasons for that are in the other podcasts. But one of them is that it actually is a little tougher to digest fruits, even though we think the opposite. We feel like fruit helps us to have a bowel movement. But for our infants who are still kind of like working through their digestive system is still kind of like developing, really, and they're just getting used to breaking down food, the raw fruit can be trickier for them. So that can actually slow digestion. So be mindful to not choose the raw fruits and any raw vegetables and cereals as the first food. Kind of avoid those foods to begin with. Avoid them altogether is my recommendation, but especially take them out if you're seeing a change to your child's bowel movements. Figuring out the cause of your little one's constipation, as I mentioned in the first podcast, in case you didn't watch that one, because it might not have applied to you, is really important. Whether they're 0 to 6 months old or 6 to 12 months old, if they're having slow digestion or true constipation, it really is a sign that they're being exposed to something that's not in rhythm with their body, that they're either sensitive to or even allergic. So you want to figure out the why. You want to go in there and figure out why this is happening. You don't want to give medications that the gastroenterologists often recommend, like the Miralax or the Senna. You don't even really want to do the more natural ones. And there are a few natural remedies out there that will help infants have bowel movements. And I don't even really recommend those. There's some specific herbs that we can use. And I really don't even recommend those, because what we want is to figure out why it's happening, especially in that first year of life. You want to figure out why and get them regulated. You don't want to give them medicine or even give them natural products to help them have a bowel movement. We really want to get to the reason and the core reason as to the why. You also really want to try to help the constipation, because if you don't and you just let it go, some people are like, oh, my child's happy, even though they're going every 4 to 5 days, they're content and they're growing. I don't really like to hear that either, because over the long run, when we're not getting rid of waste on a regular basis, and we get rid of waste in a variety of ways, but one of the big ones is through bowel movements, right? And if we're not doing that on a regular basis, you're just really at risk for having a child who's may get more commonly get like mucus, congestion, skin irritations, eczema, respiratory illnesses. They're just more at risk for that because their body's not detoxing on a regular basis. So that's why it's important, even if your child is comfortable, if they're not going regularly, you still want to try to get them to a place where they're having at least 1 to 2 bowel movements every day, so we know they're getting rid of their waste, so they're optimally healthy. I often have parents come in and they want to detox their child. They want to make sure they're free from toxins from the environment. And, the first thing to do is to get that digestive system regulated. There's no magical potions to be given. It really is going back to like the foods that we eat. And it's so important to know that our bodies are working optimally. And you'll know that by seeing your infant have regular bowel movements. All right, moms and dads, I hope this information was helpful for you. I will have some links at the bottom of the podcast if you do want more information. Some of the things I talked about can be found in other podcasts that I've already released, such as dairy and first foods for our babies. Remember, parenting is a journey and you're doing an amazing job. Stay curious and keep learning, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining Jennie on the Simply Pediatrics podcast. We hope that the valuable information she shared in this episode will inspire and empower you on your holistic parenting journey. If you would like to learn more about Jennie, her Simply Pediatrics practice, or anything that she spoke about today, please check the show notes that accompany this podcast and you'll find all the links and resources you need. You can also sign up for the Simply Pediatrics mailing list so that you receive Jennie's weekly newsletters packed with vital information and holistic parenting gems. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider giving this page a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any episodes. And don't forget to connect with us by sharing your thoughts in the comments section below. Follow Simply Pediatrics on any and all of the social media platforms. And if you're interested in an in-person or a virtual appointment with Jennie, please see the contact details in the show notes. Stay tuned for more episodes packed with a wealth of powerful information to support you on your holistic parenting path. See you next time.